Welcome to the LowCarbMD podcast. No one is beyond help. No one is beyond hope.
As we have always said, we are bringing you medical information and cutting-edge science, but none of this is medical advice. Please seek out input from your own doctor. Welcome to the LowCarbMD podcast. This is Tro and I am here with Eric Edmeades, who I have heard a lot about, and I cannot wait to interview him. He's a speaker, coach, certifier of coaches. He's also, what really piqued my interest was with two people I really love, Anthony Gustin and Paul Saladino said, you have to talk to this guy. You have to talk to him. He's the coolest guy. He's been visiting the Hadza tribe for many years, and he was nice enough to bring us with him. And so when I'm like, well, hold on, wait a second, here's a guy who's interested in getting people healthy, getting people, to improve their lives, improve their health, and he's out there, spending time with that kind of tribal ancestral living. I want to hear all about this. I reached out to you. I was glad that we were able to connect. We got your team and my team together, and we were able to connect. I just want to say I'm really happy, excited to talk with you. And Dr. Brian Lencius is going to be so upset he missed it. He had a family issue. He wanted to be here, and he said to let you know that he's a huge fan and he wishes he could make it, but he had a family issue to attend to. So with that, yeah, nice to have you here.
Absolutely a privilege and honor to be here. I'm excited as well.
So help me understand, before it was, hip and cool, and, you've been, it's funny. I read a book recently. I can kind of laugh about the book a little bit. But there was a scientist who's been studying the Hadza for a number of years, and he recently wrote a book about it. And here you are, nobody's funding you to go study the Hadza, as far as I'm aware. With your own money, with your own time, you're going and learning. So how do you come to, hey, I want to help people change their lives, I want to make a difference? How do you go from that to, I need to learn what these people know?
It starts with my late teens and just being sick all the time. And, and when I say sick, I mean, not terminally sick. I wasn't, but I was always ill, always on medication. And then I made some adjustments to food things. I was inspired to start looking at food, and in a space of about a month, I lost 35 pounds. I was 21 years old. That's a big deal. That's a big deal at 21. It's a big deal at any age, right? But at 21, I was not headed anywhere good. And so that got me particularly curious about nutrition, and that's where I started. But in the meantime, my great-grandfather had discovered the oldest Homo sapiens skull in history. He was an archaeologist, zoologist. And so even at the age of 12, I was deeply fascinated about origins, deeply fascinated about human history, evolution, that sort of stuff. And ultimately, those two things kind of ended up intersecting. As I delved into human history and anthropology and that kind of stuff, in the meantime, I was running businesses. I'm largely an entrepreneur. And, so that put me in a position to be able to fund my own research and my own projects and such. And I was running leadership programs where I would take people up Kilimanjaro. It's a 2-week leadership program. And I screw this leadership program with air conditioning. Let's actually put them through some stuff. And so up the mountain we would go, blah, blah, blah. Came down the mountain in 2007. And my logistics partner in the country said, hey, I've been reading about you, and I'll bet you'd like to visit with the Hadza people. I bet you'd really. And I'm like, holy crap! I thought the last remaining Bushmen were the Kung. They were way down in Namibia. I didn't think we were anywhere near them. And I said, let's do it. We spent, I don't know, a week or 10 days with machetes and 4x4s, crashing our way through the bush until finally we met one of the families. And I was so blown away by that experience that I've been going back for 15 years, and it's now been popularized and touristicized and written about, but it still has not lost any of its magnificence and romance for me. I think somehow I've lost sound from you.
I was muted. So you're, you're kind of helping people, motivating people, trying to make, it sounds like to some degree, institutional change, and as well as personal changes, right? And you're out there saying like, okay, you're out in the wilderness, inspired by archaeology, inspired to get healthy, it sounds like. And somebody's like, you should go see the Hadza. And you're like, I'm game.
Let's do it.
You know,
It
was the first time you went?
It was that trip in 2007. But, I think that in about 1984, 85, a guy wrote an article, S. Boyd Eaton wrote this article that got published on the internet when the internet was new in about 95 or 96. And I read that article and I realized dude was onto something. And of course that connected me with my grandfather's work and what have you. So when these guys said, and I'm from Africa, I'm that guy that if you're on the plane that goes down, you want me to be there in the African bush with you, I can handle it. And so when these guys said, let's go see the Hadza, we went. And I remember every visit that I've had, but that first one, it was like, I don't know it was like stepping out of the DeLorean. And I hate referring to it as time travel, because I know we're not supposed to romanticize their lives as a direct, a representation of our ancestral life. But I do think it's fair to say that their lifestyle is the closest representation on Earth today to our ancestral history, to our evolutionary history. And so walking in there into the camp the first time, it was a little scary, but it was super exciting. And I thought I was going to be there. I was really mostly interested in the food side of it. How do they hunt? How do they gather? What do they eat? But it turned out to unpack all kinds of amazing things about communication, leadership, general human psychology. It's been fascinating.
I'm just thinking about some of the tribal cultures, we talked about the Maasai a little bit before we aired. We talked about the Hadza. We're talking about the Hadza now. And just thinking about people visiting, just in the United States, in the Northeast area, Amish, kind of like a more traditional way of living, So, it sounds like you're interested in what they're eating, how they're living, but it sounds like along the way you learned something about their culture.
I think I can explain it like this. I developed a theory some years ago that there is something that I now call the evolution gap. And the evolution gap is sort of explained like this, that human evolution, physical evolution, genetic evolution is a very painfully slow process. I mean, we're talking about something that happens over thousands of years, not hundreds of years, unless you're manipulating it. And evolution has always happened in lockstep with the environmental changes that our ancestors are living through. So, the reason that you and I have, say, lighter colored skin is because our ancestors came from a place with less sun exposure. And it took thousands of years of natural selection for us to evolve skin that allows more sun to get through. Consequently, Nigeria is quite dangerous for us, but equally, Norway, quite dangerous for Nigerians. So this slow evolutionary process met with innovation starting about 15,000 years ago. And it opened a gap between our very slow pace of evolution and our incredibly powerful pace of innovation. And inside that gap lies, I believe, almost all human suffering and disease and anxiety, stress, psychological problems. They all lie in that gap. Now, I'm not saying that if you live the life of the Hadza, you'll just be happy all the time. But I will say that I have never seen I've traveled to over 60 countries around the world. I have never in my life seen a group of people that were more contented with their day-to-day lives than the Hadza people anywhere on Earth.
Yeah, I think, let me tell you, I understand completely what you're saying. If you look at obesity, for example, 200 years ago, it was a superpower. Even 1,000 years ago, it was a superpower. The ability to, even diabetes. Right? Diabetes, just think about it in times of famine or in times of scarcity, to be able to make higher blood sugar. It was literally a superpower,
Yep.
Right? Meaning like your kids lived because with less food, you had higher sugar.
Yep.
Triglycerides, high cholesterol means you have more energy available in the blood to go to run 25 miles, come 25 miles back, war a tribe in between, and make it to fight another day. So things things like high iron in the blood, which are part of modern disease, these were evolutionary purposeful. You had a higher VO2 max, you had a more exercise potential, right? And so I think there's something to be said about interpreting modern suffering, modern disease through that prism,
Yeah, absolutely. Use the skin color example. The gap is not that we have different colors of skin. The gap is that we now have the ability to transport ourselves thousands of miles in a single generation, something that's only happened in the last 200 years. We all used to have the optimal skin color for where we lived relative to the equator. And then we invented planes. And now you can take somebody from Nigeria and move them to Norway, and they are far more inclined to develop rickets. And you can take somebody from Norway and send their ass down to the Bahamas, and they're far more inclined to get a sunburn. So it's not like, I think that we can look at that gap in a number of ways. You're totally on with this, retaining fat was a superpower. In fact, during the COVID pandemic, I'm a numbers guy. So I went and crunched all the numbers back in March 2020. And I immediately locked on to, and I wrote about this, that obesity correlated with adverse COVID outcomes. In my crunching of the numbers, though, what I didn't write about, because frankly, I just didn't care to admit it, was that obesity inversely correlates with negative flu outcomes. It literally inversely correlates. If you are obese, you are more likely to survive the flu, which is the superpower to which you refer.
Yeah, so it's interesting, if you look at, so I think it's how it's mediated, who it's affecting. If you look at flu, right, it's predominantly both disease of the very elderly and disease of the very young, right? Both points where you want more reserve, right? And so if you have less reserve and you're 2 weeks out of the flu, this could be potentially, catastrophic. This is the quote unquote, the fake obesity paradox, but with, I think the link in our modern society and how, my interpretation of the negative outcomes for COVID, it's through glycemia, right? Meaning hyperglycemia makes the viral response worse. People with obesity are more likely to have that hyperglycemia, which is the most potent risk factor for COVID deaths. Meaning if you have a high blood sugar, you are more likely to die than anything else from COVID.
Yeah, and what's crazy is you can say this, you can, these days you can almost get away with saying it, but if you said this stuff a year and a half ago on Twitter, hey, I'm not you're an anti-vaxxer. I'm like, hey, we're talking about one disease and one disease risk profile relative to obesity. How are you extrapolating this whole anti-vaxxer plus on it? This issue of closing the gap, of recognizing that the ability to gain weight is a superpower and the ability to be incredibly efficient in the processing of sugar because it was very seasonal and rare, it's important. And then, it's an obvious question. Take a species that has become incredibly and phenomenally good at processing and conserving energy from sugar and gaining weight, that evolved in a culture with almost no carbohydrate access. So they had to be super good at it, and then move them to a culture where they have permanent and consistent and non-seasonally controlled carbohydrate access. That's a recipe for disaster that we can watch happening from 1970 to today.
And if you look at all the indigenous people, right, their health's, dramatically declined, and more so than other people when they were exposed to Coca-Cola and modern food, right?
Yeah, it's faster and harder.
If you look, you can be in Australia, it doesn't matter. You can be in Africa, it doesn't matter. You can be in the United States, it really doesn't matter. You can be in China, it doesn't matter. Indigenous people, when they're exposed to sugar, it's amazing the rate at which, and you can see it unfold. If I take somebody from the Hadza tribe and I move them to the United States, they will develop diverticulitis. That diverticulosis, and otherwise there's almost no diverticulosis. If anything, a little bit on the right side, doesn't really exist on the left side, which is we remove people's colons now in this part of the world because their entire left, colon is out, filled with these out pockets. But bottom line is there's something different about their lifestyle, and we don't know exactly what that is, but it doesn't seem to be genes.
I actually think we do know what it is, and that we are being, fed a bunch of rubbish to cause cognitive dissonance so that we will surrender to the latest bit of food marketing. I'm sure you're familiar with the two Bantings. There's of course the Banting who invented exogenous insulin, right? That's
yeah.
But what you might not know is that he had another relative sometime before that. And they never met each other because the one died just before the other was born. And the first Banting was an obese man living in the United Kingdom. Went to his doctor, and his doctor said, well, you got to stop eating carbs. Like, this is 18, like amazing prophet. Like, this doctor knows what's going on. I mean, okay, let's be clear. The Romans knew about diabetes. So it's not like this doctor was that far ahead of the curve. But this Banting lost all the weight, wrote a book about it, and wanted to give the book away for free, and gave the royalties away and whatever, because he believed this is a message that had to go to the world. Now, the next Banting invents exogenous insulin, gives the patent to the University of Toronto for $1, because he believes that people have a fundamental right to this. And of course, somewhere between that giving for $1 and today, it became this multi-billion-dollar industry. But there's a little sidebar that most people don't know about that Banting, and that is that the Hudson's Bay Company sent him on a trip up into the Canadian Shield, up around Hudson's Bay. And while he was up there, he observed some things, like what happens to the first Canadians, the original people, when you bring them the garbage, ground up grains and fake sugar and all that stuff. And he observed this, and he was on a train. And there was a member of the press there with him, and he made what he thought was an off-the-record remark. And the off-the-record remark is, we're killing these people with European food. He said this. It was absolutely clear to him that they were being wiped out by it. And of course, the reporter ran with the story. It got published. It was huge. The Hudson's Bay Company, the government, all tried to get him to rescind his remarks. And he said, look, I wouldn't have made them intentionally, but it's the truth and I won't rescind it. And it's like, I'm amazed. We had these two incredibly powerful Bantings that knew everything that we needed to know to prevent the obesity and diabetes thing from taking off, but we didn't listen.
Yeah. So, I mean, look, here we are now with the obesity epidemic and a diabetes epidemic. And I kid you not, we have researchers who get funding, who literally say, and I cannot make this up, who literally say, I don't think carbohydrates have anything to do with blood sugar and diabetes, right? So you can't make this up. These are like prominent researchers in the field, dietitians.
And Twitter doesn't ban them.
Right? No, Twitter doesn't ban them. So where do we go wrong? And can you tell me, all right, so you're now, whatever, you're a free thinker, you think differently, you're willing to take risks, you're on a plane to the Hadza. Right, you get there, and you've been going every year, every couple of years since.
Sometimes every year. I've gone probably 10 times in 15 years. Okay,
so 10 times in 15 years. So, can you help me understand? Can you unfold what you've learned about ancestral living, about the ancestral lifestyle, the ancestral diet, how they approach food, how they approach culture? I mean, can you just walk me through, like, first 2 years I learned X, Y, and Z, and then as you go deeper, I'm sure there's more and more layers to this, and what you've observed and what you've seen, and there's a reason you keep going back. So, yeah. What? Because clearly you're still learning.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's start with food relative to them. So, when you talked about this idea of being able to, gain fat as a superpower. What happened when we started doing this work, and I started actually coaching and working with people and so on, is that we found out that what we really needed to do is get them to cycle through the natural sub-Saharan seasons that humans evolved to go through. And this is a principle that is not firmly understood. Even some of the guys that are at the cutting edge that I'm really big fans of, even they view, say, for example, keto as a lifestyle, or they view it as like the right way. And the fact of the matter is, and maybe the fact of the matter is a hard way to say it. My opinion of this is that our ancestors have evolved, first of all, the ability to survive these seasonal fluctuations. First of all, to survive them. So in other words, winter's coming, and you need to understand what sub-Saharan winter looked like. It was drought. It was not Wisconsin, right? Like, it was drought. It was long periods of time without rain, which means no real plants to eat, no real hunting. It's a very, very difficult time. And so our ancestors, of course, didn't have food stores and so forth. So when you're out with the Hadza, what you notice very quickly is the way they live is incredibly determined by the natural environment they're in, which is, of course, controlled by this annual cycle of seasons. So then that brings up the question, and this is insane to anybody who would write publicly that carbs have nothing to do with blood sugar and nothing to do with, it's insane, because how do you suppose that the Hadza and our ancestor, how do you suppose that they know to start gaining weight for winter? I mean, do they have an app for that? Is that how they're doing it? Did they read a book? Did they read, No, what happens is that suddenly in the fall, they start having greater access to these foods, to these carbohydrate-based foods. And you watch the Hadza, like the minute the fruit is on the trees, they are distracted. The craving for sugar is powerful. When they see honey, they will risk their lives to get honey. It's amazing to me. But then guess what? A few weeks later, it's gone. It's gone. And they completely switch food sources. So the way I look at this, what we've observed over the years, because I've visited in different seasons, different times, is that item number one is that humans evolved, as you put it earlier, the superpower to be able to survive these dramatic seasonal fluctuations. But then the next piece comes along. And this is a bit like food. Like, for example, if a species starts eating food, the first thing the species has to do is evolve the ability to survive that food. Then if it eats that food for long enough, it might evolve a nutritional dependency upon that food, right? Then it becomes an actual food, not just a survival food. Well, the same thing with these seasons. So, you have these people that now go into, say, winter, and they go into dramatic calorie restriction during winter. And you would think that, well, they had to evolve to survive that. I would put to you that they not only evolved to survive that season, but they evolved to utilize it. They evolved to make the best of it. So now they go into winter, they go into significant calorie restriction. Their body becomes incredibly reluctant to release any fat, which is the irony of the diet industry. But at the same time, their body switches to protein autophagy, and it burns proteins in order of disaster. I'm sure my metaphor for this.
Do they store foods? So like, how do they? So do they salt or make, do they smoke meats or?
Well, now, and I've seen more of it in the last, say 5 or 6 years. Now they will dry meats, but ironically not for themselves. They're drying it to trade it, because they trade it with the local, there's another tribe called the blacksmiths, and they trade meat for arrowheads, and they trade meat for ganja because they love the stuff. And but they don't typically store their own food. Now, one of the problems that we have today is that the missionaries, in a very loving but seriously misguided fashion, are now coming in and providing them with grains and oils and stuff like that. So I'm not kidding you. 4 years ago, I was on a trip and I saw my very first overweight Hadza. Like, she was seriously overweight, which is almost impossible in that environment, unless, of course, the missionaries are feeding you exactly the stuff that's going to trigger your fat retention.
It's sad to hear that, right? I mean, it's sad. They probably think they're doing something good. We're going to bring them, it's funny. I had a family member who was making a culinary dish, and they said, this is our old, recipe. This is how it's been done. I'm like, you use vegetable oil. Like, there's no way this is an old recipe. This is like, it has a timestamp, right?
Yeah, my version of ancient and the average food person's version of ancient is very different. I'll give you a good example of this, by the way, and you should do it. Do it on your own, or come with me next time we go down. But never mind the Hadza now. There's another interesting place to go. Many years ago, I'm on the southern. I was born in South Africa, so I have family there. So I'm on the south coast of South Africa, and I'm at the beach, and my mom's heading back to the car with my girlfriend at the time, and I suddenly feel this compulsion to run up the side of the hill, and I do, and I know that they're going to be waiting for me at the car, but I cannot fight the compulsion. I run up the hill. I get to the top of the hill. There's a cave there, and there's a plaque. I didn't discover the cave. There's a plaque there. Somebody else discovered the cave. But I read about it, and it said that people had been living in all of these caves scattered along the southern coast of South Africa continuously for, wait, you live in America. An old house in America might be between 80 and 150 years old. I lived in England for a long time. An old house there could be 200 or 300 years old. Croatia, 800 years old. Egypt, pyramids, 5,000 years old, or built by aliens, but whatever. But people have been living in these caves continuously for 200,000 years. And the weird part was, it then said that the caves were excavated by this guy, T.F. Dreyer. And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. That night I'm having dinner with my grandmother. Her last name is Dreyer. I said, do you know this guy, this Dreyer? She goes, yeah, it's my father. So it was my great grandfather. So I then went back to some of the caves. And what I found in one of them that was fascinating is archaeologists have now dug down into the cave floor. When people live in caves, they just leave what's called cave litter. They they throw stuff over their shoulder. It's cave litter. And as the generations move on, the cave floor is rising and rising and rising and rising. And no one generation notices this happen. No one generation looks and goes, man, that ceiling's getting closer. It's just rising and rising and rising. Now they cut down deep in and put a staircase in and put glass walls up. And you can walk down those stairs and you can see precisely what they ate for 200,000 years. It's not a mystery.
I'm guessing it was meat.
You know, I mean, you know, it was predominantly meat, of lots of seafood, lots of shellfish, lots and lots of shellfish. And you know, and of course you can't see this, but when they've examined it, they've obviously found, you know, some examples of plant material and stuff in there as well, but it's definitely meat focused. There's no doubt about that.
You know, you mentioned this concept of kind of eating for the seasons, you know, and eating what's available. You know, there's another guest we've had on, Kean Foley, who wrote a book, Don't Eat for Winter, who talks about, you know, the seasonal variations of diet. And, you know, you just talked about how that sugar literally, you know, the Hadza would risk everything for that. We've seen, you know, other animal, I'm not, you know, the human species is an amazing animal. We've seen other animals risk their lives. Like, you know, I've seen some videos of kind of mountain goats literally traversing a dam, you know, at depth, you know, at like a vertical dam, you know what I mean? To just lick salt, right? To just lick salt. I mean, literally risking everything for salt. And then the way you described, you know, the way you described the Hadza was like they were risk their lives for honey.
You see, the new Jungle Book, no, it's not new anymore, but the live action animation kind of Mowgli, I think it was called.
Yeah, from Netflix or something like that. Yeah, I watched.
So you might remember there's a scene in there where Mowgli, where Baloo tricks Mowgli into climbing up the cliff to go get the honey up there.
Yeah.
I'm not kidding you. 2 weeks after I saw that movie, I am with the Hadza. We walk into a canyon that looks exactly like that. And the chief turns to two of the boys and says, go up and get those beehives that are hanging from the top of the cliff. These are over 200 feet up. Like, it is insane. These kids start scaling up the walls, like scale it. Any helicopter parent in the world would be having a heart attack at this point. The kids are scaling up, and then the cliff has an overhang, and they're hanging by one hand. They're 200 feet in the air. They're hanging by one hand, trying to get, and the bees are stinging them, and they're trying to get at the. So then one of the kids goes over the lip, walks over to where the hives are, and dangles himself off the edge of the cliff to get these things. I'm sweating so badly watching them. And I suddenly thought, if there's any chance at all that the chief is doing this for me, like if there's any chance at all that the observer is affecting the observed, I talked to my translator. I said, can you ask him to stop this? Like, that's how stressful it was for me. And they explained to me later, no, those kids climb up there for honey all the time.
So here's the thing, right? If people ask me, how is it, right? So the way that manifests in our modern world is people eating despite ill health and trying to reconcile it.
Yeah.
Right? You are living with this impulse. You are that little kid, literally driven to go risk everything for the salt on the dam, for the honey in that, you know, you're hanging by one hand, risking everything for this, you know, to fulfill this impulse.
And also bear in mind, for a non-nutritive impulse, like it's basically just energy. Like, just, you know, that's the other side of it. It's not even like your body's calling out for some protein and multiple vitamins and minerals. It's like, it's purely energy.
Yeah. I mean, so this is what you're up against. And most people can't reconcile this. You know, they think they're in control. Like they think that, you know, all of this, their struggle is their fault. You know, nobody chose that programming. You know, that kid is up there. He's like, no, they do it all the time. You know, that goat that's on the top of the dam, this whole family's up there. You know?
And in their top 10 causes of death is falling from cliffs and trees. But you know what's not in their top 10 causes of death? Heart disease, cancer, diabetes, medical error. They have different dangers.
Yeah, but so can we learn from these impulses, right? Can we learn from it and reconcile it? You know, we can't, you know, if I was there, I would just take a honey pot and say, like, you know, here you go, have a little bit, you know, or like have this once a year, you know, like go ahead, don't climb up there, have this once a year. and then don't have it again, and you'll be fine. I'm
They
sure.
will eat it every single day that they can find it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the question is, can we overcome the impulse? So, when I talk about this concept of the evolution gap, in a variety of different ways, you can close this gap. Silly example, but wisdom teeth. The reason that I believe that we evolve wisdom teeth is not because God or evolution is stupid and decided to put teeth that we don't have space for. And it's not because we suddenly evolved smaller jaws more quickly than we could de-evolve our teeth. It's a much more simple thing. Right now, today, the average person, 1 in 3 people are missing a tooth in the front of their face. If they didn't put an implant in, or if they didn't put a denture in, their wisdom teeth would come in and respace their mouth. They're not wisdom teeth, they're spare teeth. About 1/3 of people never grow them, and people who have face trauma are more likely to get them. So now the question is, how do we close the gap? Well, it's really simple. We cut them out. That's an easy gap to close. But now how do we close the gap where we have a powerful and undeniable craving for sweet things, and they're everywhere? So how do we do that? And that's the tough part. And one of our biggest messages to people with, like, I hate the word lifestyle.
You say undeniable, right? But most people blame themselves for this impulse.
Yeah.
Like, it's my fault, right? I want, something sweet, right? Coca-Cola knows this. Nestle knows this. Mars knows this. M&M's, Pizza Hut, McDonald's, they know this, right? They know it so well. One of the reasons they add sugar to things that don't even need sugar is they also know that sugar stimulates the actual craving and stimulates appetite. Right. So they're building food to make you hungry. No, if somebody is overweight, has type 2 diabetes, or frankly is walking around with almost any lifestyle disease, and I hate the name lifestyle disease because that was invented by the food industry to shift the blame onto the consumer, right? Like, we'll call it a lifestyle disease. That way it was their fault. Nope, it was not their fault. The food industry is significantly more dangerous, manipulative, and disgusting than the tobacco industry ever was. Yeah, because you don't need tobacco to live. Yeah. You need food to live. Yeah. So now they're forcing us to reconcile, a basic need on somewhat of an addiction or addictive properties, at least reconciling addictive properties to food. And yet we have to learn to live with it. And to make matters even worse, every part of our social construct, is around sharing food. When you're with the Hadza, tell me, did they eat alone? Did they take honey and eat it in secret so they didn't tell their tribesmate and hide the beehive so nobody would find out?
No, even better than that. They have very powerful superstition and lore to prevent that behavior. The hunters, for example, there's certain cuts of meat that are called ipim that are sacred, and they have very powerful superstition about that. So let's say I'm out hunting. I've got my Hadza bow, and I go hunting, and I take down a kudu, and I eat some of that ipim meat without the tribesmen around me, then I will befall some terrible fate. I will have a child with birth defects. Something horrible will happen to me. They believe this so thoroughly that the minute a kill is made, they immediately summon other hunters around to share. And so they've developed lore and culture to prevent that whole, I'm just going to hoard this for myself. So to some degree, they know that gluttony is an issue, right? And that, you can see it. It's very much built into the fabric of our relationship that we share food. Yeah, I think so. And I think it's also that particular lore was also probably invented by aging hunters that wanted to protect their access to protein as they got older and knew they couldn't go on the hunts. Right. Yeah, exactly. The first food company. Manipulation, right? That's exactly. I'm walking into my 60s and I can't really keep up on the hunts anymore. Like these kids at 17 and 18. But they can't eat that meat without me. So that's pretty smart marketing. That is pretty smart marketing. So it's so you're there. You're learning about their culture, their eating practices, and it sounds like you see that they're drawn to honey, and fruits, with a high degree of avidity. Well, what else did you learn about their culture as it relates to food? Yeah, I don't know if you saw this, but some months ago, Anthony posted some stuff about his experience with the Hadza, and he just got attacked on Twitter. I saw it. Yeah. It was terrible. So I jumped in to defend him because like people were basically saying he was like a weekend warrior, went there one time and is making all these deductions. And to be fair, and he and I talked about this, he did make some big logical leaps that were about confirmation bias. And we all do that. We're all capable of that. But the one of the things that came up is that he was basically flying in the face of what is generally published about the Hadza. Generally, people try to suggest that they're plant-based. And I'm amazed that I see this all the time. People, oh yeah, they live a plant-based life. Well, that is in 15 years not been my experience in the least. Don't get me wrong, they eat plants. I've debated. Matter of fact, when I first met Paul, we had we were no kidding. We were at where were we? We were at a party in Los Angeles and we went there and a friend of ours, one of the founders of Zumba, connected us to talk, and we're having this conversation, and he was carnivore. And we had this conversation. Well, my experience is, yeah, maybe meat-based, but we've had a seasonal relationship with plants and we can't just write that off. And so, what I would say is that we can look at the Hadza behavior and maybe make a little bit of a deduction based on this. When I'm out with the Hadza and we go hunting, so the way that works is you wake up first thing in the morning and, they start kind of moving around and waking up and getting their bows, and they start talking quite rapidly, and then off you go. And you leave camp at quite a pace, and you have to leave camp at quite a pace because you're not going to get anything near camp. The animals are smarter than that. So you leave at quite a pace, not a run, but a fast walk jog. And then there will come a point where you settle down into a firm hike and you're heading off. It depends on what the prey of the day is. Sometimes we go hunt baboons, sometimes it's kudu, sometimes it's wild, bush pigs, or it's just simple opportunism. Now, watch this. This is where it gets interesting. If we are not tracking anything and they spot sour plums, like these little grape-sized fruits, they will stop and eat them. If they spot a bush that has root vegetables, they will stop and eat them. And if we haven't eaten for a while, they'll even make a fire and cook them because they're tastier that way. That's if we're not tracking anything. But the minute we are tracking something, they will walk past every fruit tree. They will walk past every root vegetable if they're tracking something. And what that says to me is that meat is the higher priority. That fruit and vegetables are the fallback anti-starvation food that they eat on occasion when the opportunity for meat is somewhat reduced. Once they're tracking, you can barely take the only thing I've ever seen them like vaguely get tempted once they're tracking is honey. And even then what'll happen is two of the hunters will peel off to go get the honey and the other guys stay on the trail to get the meat.
I mean, it shows you how much also fat and protein plays into that reward cycle of eating food. It's not, it's like in the low carb space, there's this, vilification of sugar. And I think rightly so in our modern environment, it's certainly an issue, but to some degree, fat, sweetness, fat and protein combinations can certainly play on that reward. We can't deny that either. If you give me, cheese, I will eat more of whatever I'm putting that cheese on. If you give me butter, I'll eat more of whatever I'm putting that butter on, Yeah,
it's very true. And I think that this comes back to something you raised earlier, and that is, how do we overcome that? How do we deal with that? So one way to examine that, and it's been a huge part of the last 15, 20 years of my life, is one of the ways we examine it is to take a look at why the diet industry doesn't work. So you can see, you look at the average person goes on 126 diets in their lifetime, and they manage to stay on each diet for about 6 days. Those are the reported averages, and so clearly they don't work. But here are a couple of things. The first thing is that a lot of diets count on calorie restriction. Oddly though, calorie restriction triggers the body to hold fat. So that's an evolutionary response. So right away, 90% of diets are useless.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Set up to fail.
Yeah, exactly. Now, the next thing is, and this is awesome, is that every human being has a reward system for rebellion. It starts when you're 3 and it peaks when you're 16, 17, 18, but it carries on into your life. So whenever you feel like you're rebelling against authority, you get a little juice. Well, if you're on a diet and the diet told you couldn't have donuts, then what's going to happen is that when you eventually give yourself permission, which is the language people use, well, I just gave myself permission. They release feel-good rebellion chemicals, dopamine, serotonin, what have you, and reward themselves for eating the donut, which then as they eat the fat and sugar, they get more serotonin and dopamine. And so the cycle is continued. So now diets fail on that. Then the next thing is, you ate a fucking donut, excuse me, but you ate a donut? What are you, weak? right? Well, now what we're doing is we're blaming that person and we're causing them shame and guilt, which are known food triggers, right? Like they're known. So in each step of the way, the average diet is triggering every single possible way to make somebody fail. What we had to do is like unpack that and go the other way around. And the way I would put this is that now the great fad is to tell everybody that willpower doesn't work. Willpower works perfectly fine. It's just that you have to understand it. So willpower is what makes it possible for you to hold your breath. I'm looking at you, you're pretty fit. I bet you could hold your breath out to 2 minutes-ish. You figure you could do that?
I have no idea, man.
I figure you could get out.
No way. No, I try.
No, you got it. All right.
I can do water. No, I can make it one way across the pool.
Okay. But with some training, you could do it, right? But here's the thing. If you were holding your breath and you were under the water, there would come a moment where your body would override your willpower and you would inhale water, right?
Yeah.
That's how willpower works. If you are in a smoky room with known toxic, noxious, poisonous smoke, and you're holding your breath because you're waiting to be rescued, there will come a point where your body's need for oxygen will become so powerful that the body will override your willpower and cause you to inhale the poison. That's how willpower works. Willpower allows you to take momentary conscious control of your behavior until your body overrides the decision. So now you take somebody and put them on a willpower diet. Well, guess how long that on average works? 6 days. By the end of the 6 days, they're inhaling whatever they want to eat. And that's because that's how willpower is. What we have to do instead is like break down the hypnosis that they've been conditioned to by the food industry. Like here, this is a funny one, but like the food industry has hijacked our holidays and our emotional states. And they've done that in order to take decision away from us. So Christmas, I went to an Anglican school. I'm not an overly religious dude in my life, but I went to an Anglican school and I remember the nativity story. You might remember there was Mary and Joseph and there was the questionable pregnancy and then there was the baby and the 3 wise men came along and they brought candy canes and pumpkin pie. And no, they brought frankincense, myrrh, and gold. Somewhere along the line, the candy cane manufacturer said, we can own this. And then Easter comes along. I don't remember chocolate. Cadbury came along and said, we can have Easter. Then the pizza company came along and said, you know what we can have? We can have your team lost commiseration. Every
Friday night. The pizza companies came and said, we can have every Friday night. You know?
Yeah, we can have football. We can have Friday night. And then another food company came along and said, you know what we can have? We can have, you just had a shitty day at work today. And then another food company came along and said, we can have, you just had a great day at work today. And another food company came along and said, we can solve your 5-hour energy problem at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And that's it. Now we're at a place where way too many of our decisions are being made for us by the food industry. We are being fed as though we live in captivity, and that doesn't work out for wild animals or for us.
Yeah. So the inherent problem though is, reconciling. You're dealing with an addictive substance, something that can drive you to cause self-harm. Think of that kid hanging out with one hand at 200 feet, something that can drive you to cause self-harm. Right? You have to reconcile that with a society that has external factors, right, driving you to eat. We all know Coca-Cola and Sam Adams and McDonald's and Pizza Hut want us to eat more. We know that, right? We know that, right? We also know the restaurants down the street want us to keep, for us to be recurring customers. We get that, right? But it's also built into our social fabric, right? Yeah. Like we want to make something tasty for you. We want to break bread with you. We want to make sure the hunters, share the meat so we don't get, some, birth defects, whatever they said, right? But the idea is that our social fabric is so intertwined with this addictive substance, right? And then, failure is blamed on the person's struggle, right? And success is also blamed on the person's struggle. I can tell you right now, my success had nothing to do with my willpower and everything to do with my ability to manipulate my environment. 100%.
I would offer you a little modification that you used willpower like a rudder on the boat. You stuck the willpower in and said, I want to make some changes. Just for that moment, you made a willpower-based decision to start doing the research, to start moving your body. You use willpower effectively.
I always had that. See, that's where I'm going to tell you. I always had that.
Yeah.
Right? Most people coming to me always had that. They have an intense desire, lose weight, be healthy, move their body, right? You get naturally, people want to move, people want to lose weight, right? But what they don't have is systems that support their goals, right? They don't have these systems, right? Like our car has a spare tire, a jack, a service to call, and if that service sucks, another service to call, right? But who do you call if you lose weight? Like if you have struggle with managing your appetite or your relationship to food, who do you call? You like, there's no confession for food. There's nobody who's going to come like, hey, Weight Watchers, I ate pizza. Well, that's 10 points. You shouldn't do that. Like,
Yeah.
how is that
and you should feel some shame about that. And then shame will want you to eat the 68 points over there on the menu.
Yeah, exactly. Like now you feel even worse. Now you're stressed out. And then, so it's a problem. People are stuck. So how do you, learning how have you translated what you've learned from the Hadza to how to help humanity? Because I see a big interest, like I get the sense you have an interest in changing humanity.
Yeah. So when I started this whole process, my first area of research was what you would now call nutritional anthropology. In fact, when I met Lauren Cordain, I asked him what stimulated his creation of the paleo diet, which was a step in the heavily right direction. And he said, funny enough, same article by S. Boyd Eaton, the same moment. So my first focus was to focus on nutrition and human history and what have you. But then people would come to me and say, how do I fix it? And I'd give them a set of rules that I absolutely knew worked. And they would stick to those rules for maximum a month. And then they would fall off. It didn't matter how good they were feeling. It didn't matter how well they were sleeping. It didn't matter that they lost 30 pounds. They would fall off. They would make an exception and then another exception, another exception. So that's where I started diving into what we now might call food psychology. And about maybe 11 years ago, I was teaching business mostly. I had been invited by Tony Robbins, the motivational speaker. I got invited by him to teach business at his programs. I was traveling around the world, and that inspired me to become a business teacher. So I was doing that. And my clients kept asking me, like, where do you get all your energy from? You're flying, you're never have jet lag, like what's going on? So I started doing a lecture on this. And you know what I found is about 3 or 4% of the people would listen to the lecture, go home, make changes. And about 10% of them would actually keep the changes, but that was like 3 or 4%. And then 10%, it was like, and that, by the way, already put me an order of magnitude more effective than the diet industry, but it seemed pointless to me. So then I started diving into this food psychology piece. And 10 years ago, I invited 8 clients into a class with me, and I guided them through a 90-day process. 2 weeks of psychological foundation, week by week incremental changes to their psychology and their nutrition, guiding them through what we now call a metabolic reset, or guiding them through the ancestral seasonal process. And you know what happened is it worked for 100% of them. Now, I'm not a real scientist, but I understand. Well, I guess, I don't know. It depends on who you're asking on Twitter, but I'm not a traditional academic scientist. But what I do know is that my one test of familiar clients of 8 people getting 100% doesn't mean a great deal. Or it does. And so I did another class.
It means a lot to those 8 people.
It does. And so I did another class of 8, and then I did another class of 8, and it was working every time. And then something crazy happened. We had clients writing to the help desk going, I want to buy this program that my friend did. And we didn't sell it. You could only get it if you were at one of my business seminars. Like, we didn't sell it, but we had people writing to the help desk going, where's this program? Then an American author by the name of Paul Sheely came along, and he did the program with his wife. And it so changed their bodies, their faces, and their lives that they had to do a reshoot of all of his PR photography for a book launch, because he changed so much in 90 days that he then told his network about it. And I had to put up a website. We went from my normal 150 coaching clients a year, and it was just a little sidelong. We would have a few thousand business clients a year, but we'd have about 150 health coaching clients a year through WildFit. And we went to immediately 200 people signed up in a week. And then another guy told his network, and 200 more people. And then Vishen Lakhiani, the founder of Mind Valley, he did it, and 1,100 people signed up. We've now had over 50,000 people in 130 countries go through this process. And what I can tell you is that we have something like an 85% completion rate. Think about that. If somebody watches video number 1, 85% of them get to the end of a 3-month training program. And that's because we've unlocked some things about the way you make these changes so that it isn't about willpower. Now, look, for you and a lot of your clients that are determined and they can make it happen, that's fine. But for the vast majority of the people that are being basically abused by the diet industry, the food industry, and frankly, big pharma, this is like, we have people writing to us in tears every day saying, I had given up faith. I had tried every diet on the planet, and I'm in clothing I haven't worn since I was 18 years old.
Yeah. We We hear very similar things.
Yeah.
I thought, it's funny you say that, like the average person, I didn't know what the effectiveness of what we could do, the power we had, focusing on the relationship to food, the psychology, teaching on hunger and cravings, and teaching people how to eat and their relationship to food. They didn't know the power, right? Like you, I was like, okay, these are 8 people, and then, we had a large employer come to us and said, do a employee wellness program. And we did it. And, these people didn't choose me.
Yeah.
The employer chose me, and we said, yeah, we're happy to do it. Right. We're happy to do it. And we're going to publish this. We got the consents, and, we're going to put this into the medical literature. The average person in 6 months lost about 40 pounds, right? The average person in 6 months lost, and we didn't pick these people. These people weren't like, they're not like, oh, we love you, Tro, we're going to do what you say,
You were foisted upon them.
Yeah, pretty much. And they did the work. They all did the work, and it spread not only, so the group lost, on average about 40 pounds. We calculated their 10-year cardiovascular risk. What was it before they started? What was it 6 months in? Right. And we reduced it by 44%. Right. This is the AHA ACC cardiac risk calculation. And we saved, about $3,000 or $4,000 per patient in medication costs. And so it hit me that, I thought that it's just, is it just the right person and the right mentor at the same time? And I don't think that's it. It's the right message. And
we now have 400 certified coaches around the world, and they're getting the results. And I was nervous about that because I wondered if it was like, was it that I'm particularly good at this or what have you? No, we've taught them the methodology, 400 of them around the world. Now, some of them only studied it for their own interest, but the ones that are active out there coaching, they're getting results.
Yeah, that's the thing, is like the next steps, certainly the self-help community, the kind of the self-improvement community, they'll always eat this message up. But the people like, the medical community, man, like we have to like smack them with data, we have to smack them with data.
So I've got I've got something interesting to share, and then we should also offline talk a little bit more about it. I will say that we are working with a very significant government of a country that I can't disclose to you here on the popular podcast that wants to run a pilot program studying our methods for reversing type 2 diabetes. And I'd love to talk with you more about that, because I want to, we'll come back to it, but here's how that,
I mean, that's exciting.
Yeah, it's super exciting. But here's how it happened really, is that, when we first started this, honest to goodness, all I was trying to do is help people have more energy. That's it. I was like, look, you want to have a better metabolism, you'll have better cognition, you'll have better memory, you'll be a better business owner. That was really, that's what I started with. Only then dramatic weight loss. We have to issue a number of disclaimers when somebody starts with us. We have to. And here are the disclaimers we have to issue. You must watch your blood pressure tightly from week 6 on, because if you are on medication that is pushing your blood pressure down, as we bring it down naturally, you are likely going to pass out. We basically have to tell them you must go and see your cardiologist or go to your doctor and have your prescription looked at again by week 6 or 7. Same thing with diabetics, same thing with people on thyroid support medication. So here's where it got kind of crazy. Is I was on with a client once, and they said, Eric, I'm so excited. I'm so excited. My A1C and this and that. And it's amazing. And my doctor tells me that I'm now pre-diabetic. What? What do you mean you're pre-diabetic? Well, I was type 2 diabetic, and now I'm pre-diabetic. Now, hold on a minute. You're not pre-diabetic. Pre-diabetic is a condition of certain measurements indicating a progression toward diabetes. What you are is post-diabetic. You might have the same numbers as somebody who's pre-diabetic, but you are trending in the other direction. And that's a very important distinction, because somebody who is pre-diabetic is eligible for medications, but somebody who's post-diabetic might not need those medications. So I kind of just off the cuff threw this to the client, and it caught on. It caught on, and suddenly we had people all over the place using this term, like post-diabetic. Like that's the goal, is to become post-diabetic. So, and where that got really interesting is I was thinking about writing a book about it, but I'm not a doctor. And I wanted to know, how should I find somebody like you and partner up? Funny enough, doctor with 3 clinics in Southern California, he's driving down the freeway and pulls over at Starbucks to get himself some energy in a cup and still falls asleep behind the wheel, wrecks his car. 3 days later, he's in a rental car. Luckily, nobody hurt. 3 days later, he pulls off at the same Starbucks to pull off and get some more energy, and drifts off into the HOV lane, gets into another accident. Again, luckily, nobody hurt. But now he's sitting here going, what business do I have being a doctor? I'm 40 pounds overweight. I'm on 10 medications. I'm hypertensive and type 2 diabetic, and I am a doctor. What is going on here? No kidding. That night, he went on to Google. He started looking for alternative thinking. He went on to Twitter and he saw the kind of stuff that you and I are posting all the time. He ended up enrolling into our program. 90 days later, he had lost the 40 pounds. He was off 9 of the 10 medications, was no longer type 2 diabetic, was no longer hypertensive, completely transformed his life. And that's a doctor. And so we've now had tons of those stories of doctors that are now either actively coaching with our techniques or prescribing what we do directly to people. So I'm with you. We have a real problem where today, the average doctor says to somebody, oh, I'm sorry, you're type 2 diabetic. Here's the medication you're going to have to take. And they don't tell them how serious it is. They don't tell them how dangerous it is. And they don't tell them that it's reversible.
Yeah, I got to tell you, and I think more people like you and doctors, like, we started the Society of Metabolic Health Practitioners because you're going to need an army of doctors, and we're going to need an army of coaches. And so we have to find ways to work together. I went through the pains of getting licensed in 48 states. And the reason for that is, it can't just be one person, one group of coaches, we have to provide comprehensive care to people. And you can see how intimately, the reason why you have to put that disclaimer on is because you're absolutely right. There's powerful changes and doctors need to be intimately involved. Most of those people, probably out of the 100,000 people you've helped, which is just amazing, an amazing amount of people you've helped, probably takes them like 3 months to get into their doctor, and and the problem is it takes like a week to normalize blood sugars in even the most severe diabetic patients. Literally, we just started somebody on our program and he's off of 3 diabetes medications. Just saw him yesterday and literally saw him a week prior. And I said, well, what would you have done if you did this on your own? He's like, well, it takes me at least 3 to 6 months to see my doctor. Right. So I'm a big believer that we need real-time care throughout the United States, throughout the world, really, but that's a regulatory nightmare. So maybe we can find ways to work together. But listen, it sounds like you're doing literally God's work. The fact that you've been inspired at such a young age for your own health and to be curious to see, hey, what are other people doing? I mean, that's inspiring in and of itself, that curiosity to go out and, since 2007 and visit the Hadza, take my good friends with you, and it sounds like the work you're doing to help businesses, help people, it's an amazing work and we need more of it. Now we need to help corporations, certainly helping people we need to do. But, my job is dealing with all those people coming off all those medications. We got to help them because their doctors don't know what the hell is going on. They don't. I
know. We have had doctors that literally fall back on miraculous. No, it's not miraculous. It's
routine.
Science.
It's routine. Yeah, actually, it's routine. They say the same thing to us. Like, either they say, you inappropriately reversed diabetes in my patient, or they say, holy shit, what the hell did you just do? And tell me more. So it sounds like you're doing great work and affecting so many people's lives. I bet that doctor who, almost got into 2 car accidents, very grateful for everything you've done.
He is, and his patients are.
Yeah, absolutely. Eric, it's been such a pleasure. Guys, where can people find you if they want to find more about you, your work, your speaking events, your programs? Where do they find you?
I am at www.eric.ee. www.eric.ee. I'm on Instagram with my first and last name and Twitter on my first and last name. And I manage the accounts myself. It's really me. It's not some team. Facebook's different. I admit that. But find me on Instagram, Twitter, or check. And of course, our company, WildFit, our health coaching company is called getwildfit.com. And you can find everything out about that there.
Awesome. Awesome. All right, guys, this is great. Thank you for all our supporters who are donating to make this a not-for-profit, commercial-free podcast. All right, guys, thank you.